Alright, picture this. You get paid your salary every month, and in just a few short weeks, you check your account balance and think to yourself, where has all my money gone? This is the reality for a lot of people, and the reason most of us don't know exactly where our money is going is because number one, it could be a lack of knowledge in terms of personal finance, or two, you might be focusing on the wrong things when it comes to managing your money. So in this video, we're going to go through the 7 places your money needs to go when you get paid in this particular sequence, because a lot of videos on this topic would typically tell you a similar set of things that you should and shouldn't do with your money when you get paid. But in my opinion, this sometimes can be a little too idealistic and not be relatable or applicable to someone who's struggling financially and just don't have the right mental space to focus on things like putting money into a retirement account. So my goal is to give you practical advice that will be realistic for whatever your financial situation might be. And before we even talk about investing or retirement accounts, the first portion of your money has got to go towards your necessities. I mean, this is just the reality of it. And this includes things like your rent or your mortgage, food, utilities, healthcare, insurance, and of course transportation. Now, while all of us have different income levels and the cost of our necessities would differ depending on our individual lifestyles or the cities that we live in, ideally, your necessities should take up less than 50% of your paycheck. If you find yourself spending more than 50% of your income for your necessities, then you might need to reevaluate what you consider as needs. For example, spending money shopping for clothes or new tech devices clearly do not qualify to be considered as necessities. And this also extends to things like eating out or paying for entertainment, but this doesn't mean you can't ever spend any money on things that make you happy. In fact, we'll get to that in just a sec. The important thing here is, if you're trying to get ahead in life financially, then you might want to reconsider some of your choices and be willing to make some sacrifices in the short term. So when you get paid, you want to allocate 50% or less of your income for your necessities, and the best way to do this is by putting the amount in a checking account separate from the account that you get paid to. However, instead of paying for things directly using this checking account, it'd be better to use a credit card to pay for items that make up your necessities, like when you're paying for gas or groceries, so that you get to enjoy all of the benefits of using a credit card, such as getting rebates or cashback. Credit cards are often misunderstood and most people use it incorrectly. The mistake many of us make is to look at credit cards as additional money, or sort of like an advance that you're borrowing from the bank. This is what ultimately leads to credit card debt, where people will buy things with money they don't actually have. So instead of looking at credit cards as sort of a line of credit where you borrow money to use in advance, look at credit cards instead as a shield where you're protecting your own actual money in your bank account so that no one could ever directly access it. You see, unlike paying with a debit card where you're essentially allowing the merchant you're shopping at to go into your account and take whatever amount they're charging you, with a credit card, instead of the merchant reaching into your bank account to access your money, they're limited to accessing the funds available within the limit on your credit card. And so this way, the bank's taking the risk if there's ever any fraudulent charges that took place. Your own money is safe in your bank account. On top of this, you're also going to be able to build your credit score when you use credit cards responsibly, which means paying the entire bill on time every month without missing any payments. This way, you won't ever be subjected to paying any interest, and you get to enjoy all the benefits that come with using a credit card. The key thing to remember is when spending with a credit card, you must only spend money that you already have in your checking account ready. You can also easily set up auto pay from the checking account with the money allocated for your necessities to make automatic payments from your bank account to the credit card every month. This way, you'll be less likely to miss any payments if, say, you happen to forget them. Now, if you still find that 50% of your income is simply not enough to cover the cost of all of your necessities, then it might be time for you to do an audit of your expenses and see which areas you might be able to cut back on. For example, when you're shopping for groceries, try switching to the store brand version instead of the name brand, because most of the time, they're pretty much the same thing and you're paying mostly for the brand and all their marketing expenses. Also, you might want to observe your consumption habits and make sure nothing's being wasted in your home. According to Feeding America, over 80 million tons of food is being wasted every year in the US, which equals to 149 billion meals. There's a chance that you might be contributing to this number and essentially wasting your hard-earned money on food that's just gonna get thrown out. Okay, now let's go on to step number 2 of where to put your money when you get paid, and that is to pay off your debts. And this includes any existing credit card debt that you have outstanding, or if you have any student loan debt. The reason I rank it here right after your necessities is because I think having debt is one of the biggest factors that is holding you back from making any sort of progress financially. Some people might ask if they should or could still invest while they currently have outstanding debt. And in my opinion, I think it'd be better to focus on paying off your debt before you even begin investing, because let's say you have some outstanding credit card debt, which has an interest rate of around 24%. Now, what is the likelihood of you being able to invest your cash and get a return that's higher than 24% when even the S&P 500 has an average return of just 8 to 10% over the last 10 years? So instead, by paying off your debt, you're kind of getting a guaranteed return of that 24% in the form of the interest that you're no longer having to pay. Now, there are different ways to pay out debt. One of them is the snowball method, where you focus on paying the smallest debt that you have regardless of the interest rate, just to be able to completely clear it off fully. And the other way is the avalanche method, where you focus on clearing the debt with the highest interest first. This is the method that I would choose because the high interest debt is really what's going to hinder any sort of progress that I can make financially. So I want to get rid of it first as quickly as possible. Then of course, you got to be sure to develop better money habits and monitor your spending to avoid accumulating even more debt, because otherwise, you're just going to end up right back in the same situation. I think one of the most important things that we can do is to focus on changing our mindset. We've all made the mistake of buying things we don't need to impress people we don't even like. In my opinion, this is one of the root causes that leads to a lot of people ending up in huge consumer debts. Now, the next thing you got to put your money to is towards building an emergency fund. This is going to act sort of like an emergency safety net if and when you have any unforeseen expenses, like say a medical issue or if you were to lose your job. Now, some of you might ask, why wouldn't you just focus on completely paying off any existing debt before starting an emergency fund? And my answer to that is that the psychological aspect of having some emergency funds set aside beats the practical aspect of clearing off some more debt. Well, at least that's just my opinion. Most financial experts will recommend saving up at least 3 to 6 months worth of expenses and stashing this away so that in the worst case scenario, you would still be able to tide through for a good 3 to 6 months without needing to overly rely on credit cards or take out personal loans, which could lead you even further into debt. Now, as far as the amount that you choose to set aside, that would be entirely up to you, but I would suggest going with at least 5% of your paycheck towards this at the very minimum. Ideally, this should be kept in a separate savings account, preferably a high yield account that you can easily access without paying any sort of fees. You'd want an account with a high percentage APY, and some of the best high yield savings accounts has a yield of between 4 to 5%. And lastly, make sure it has FDIC insurance so that your savings are protected. Now, with your necessities, debt, and emergency funds sorted, it's time to allocate money towards your retirement account. A lot of finance gurus would recommend doing this as the very first step, but for me personally, I believe the practical approach is you need to get your necessities and debt sorted out and have a little bit of emergency funds set aside, so that way you now have a little bit more room to breathe after taking care of the more immediate needs. Whereas a retirement account is something that you can only reap the benefits from 30 or 40 years later depending on your age. But don't get me wrong, having a retirement account is very important because the last thing you want is not having enough money for your expenses when you eventually retire. Doing this is really simple. If you're in the US, you could just contribute to your 401k, and in most cases, your employer might be able to match your contributions, which means if we assume the employer is offering to match 100% of your contributions up to a limit of 3% of your annual income, and let's say your annual income is say 60 grand. So 3% of it would be $1,800, which is essentially free additional money that your employer is going to put into your retirement account. So if your employer offers a matching contribution, try to contribute at least enough to maximize this match. A mistake a lot of young people make when they start working is they opt out of the 401k, only to regret it much later when they realize that they should have begun planning for their retirement earlier on. In fact, let's take a look here. If say you're 28 years old and you have an annual income of $60,000, if you were to contribute 10% of your income to your 401k, then by the age of 65, you will have over $1.4 million for your retirement. The best option to do this would be if you can get your 401k contributions deducted from your paycheck directly from your employer's payroll before you even receive your salary. This would help you avoid any temptation to use the money for other things, and like it or not, most people suck at saving money, and about 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So a forced retirement savings arrangement could actually be the best option for most people, and the 401k is likely the best and safest way. Now, if let's say your employer does not offer a contribution match for whatever reason, or if you're self-employed, then you might want to consider opening a Roth IRA account, as it offers tax-free growth and you can make withdrawals tax-free when you retire. Now, of course, this only applies if you live in the US, but regardless of whatever country you're in, there would likely be a similar sort of retirement fund that you you could contribute to. Up until this point, we've talked about the important stuff, the financially responsible stuff. But what's equally important is to allocate money for us to have fun with. This includes things like eating out, entertainment, buying new clothes, or whatever it is that makes you happy. I like to have money set aside specifically to be splurged. This is important because while we want to be financially responsible and make good financial decisions, we're only human at the end of the day, and what's life if you can't enjoy a little from time to time? So I think this is going to help make your overall money management strategy more sustainable, as you would have money allocated for you to spend and have fun on things that are not considered necessities. So for me, I think something like 10% of your income would be a decent portion for this. And if you're looking to spend on a vacation or something that costs a little bit more, then you could treat this as a short-term savings account where you could accumulate and save for a couple of months and then blow it off on whatever it is that you've been wanting. Okay, moving on now. The next place your money needs to go will be towards your long-term savings. Now, ideally, this is money that you want to stash away and never actually use, but rather allow it to grow over time. So, unlike the emergency fund that we talked about earlier, the goal of this long-term savings is for you to allow it to compound and eventually grow your wealth. You could either put this into a high-yield savings account, or what I would recommend is to put it in a Roth IRA account. An IRA basically stands for Individual Retirement Account. It's similar to a 401k that we talked about earlier, with the difference being that 401ks are offered through your employers, whereas an IRA is opened by you directly as an individual through a broker or a bank. Unlike a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA has some great tax advantages where you can contribute after-tax dollars now, meaning you pay the taxes now and enjoy the growth from the investments tax-free later on when you choose to make a withdrawal. This is a huge advantage and could help you save a ton in taxes. Also, unlike 401ks, with a Roth IRA, you get a wider selection of investment vehicles to choose from, such as stocks, bonds, ETFs, or mutual funds. The only sort of downside to a Roth IRA is that your contributions are capped at just $7,000 per year as of 2024. And so I would recommend maxing it out if you can to take the full advantage of the tax-free returns. And if for whatever reason you need to access the money in your account before your retirement, with a Roth IRA, you can withdraw your principal amount at any time you choose, except for the investment earnings. All right, now that we've covered all of the previous steps, it's time to talk about investing. And there's a reason that this has to come in at number 7 on this list, because you want to make sure all the other areas are sorted before we get to this step. For example, if let's say you didn't have an emergency fund set aside and you went ahead and started investing. If you were to encounter a situation that required some extra cash urgently, you might end up dipping into your investments and cashing out prematurely, which is why I believe it's so important to do it in this particular sequence to avoid such situations from happening and give you the best chances at success in growing your wealth. Also, if you still have outstanding debt, especially any high interest debt with things like credit cards that we talked about earlier, then I would recommend for you to focus on paying off your debt before you begin investing. Now let's break down the allocations we've talked about into different percentages. So we've got our necessities at 50%. Then I would set aside about 15% to pay off debt. 5% to build an emergency fund, 10% to a retirement account like a 401k, another 10% for you to spend on your wants, which leaves us with just 10% remaining for a long-term savings or investing. So from this standpoint, the immediate goal will be to pay off your debt and get your emergency fund set aside, because that would instantly free up another 30% of your income, which you can then allocate towards investing. Imagine this. With an annual salary of $60,000, if you invested just 10% of it with an 8% return, in 30 years, you would have $679,000. But if you instead invested 30% of your salary, then with the same 8% return, you would have over $2 million in the same span of 30 years. That's a difference of over $1.4 million. That is the power of compound interest, and that's why I encourage you to try your very best to pay off any debt that you might have and cut back on unnecessary expenses, because the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can start investing and enjoying the returns from it. Now, investing is a very broad area of discussion, and there's only so much we can talk about in just one video, so I'd highly recommend that you watch this video to find out what are the best ways to start investing, especially if you're a beginner. If you found this video helpful, please drop a like down below and consider subscribing for more videos like this. For now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.